Welcome to the Gauntlet Podcast. My name is Kate.
My name is Jason.
And I'm Marissa Kelly.
Thank you so much for joining us, Marissa. For those of you strange people who have never heard of Marissa Kelly, she is the co-founder of Magpie Games, one of the co-authors of Bluebeard's Bride, and designer of one of my favorite games, Apillion, a game about dragons. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's so exciting to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So the first thing we're always going to do in the show, which I know is not necessarily something that's super your jam, Marissa, but we're going to talk about giving me bleed and or giving me feels, however you would prefer to term that. So Jason, what's been giving you some bleed lately?
So yesterday I got a chance to play Hot Guys Making Out, which is Ben Lehman's GM-less story game. It's been around for a while. I've played it a bunch, but I hadn't played it in a while. And I guess it's more of a giving me feels than bleed, I think. I'm with you on this one, Marissa. It was just a great game. And what I loved about it was, we've covered the game before on the show, so I'm not going to go into what it's all about. But basically, it revolves around this romance between this, as described in the text, gorgeous Spanish nobleman and his young ward. And they fall in love, and the game is about like exploring their blossoming romance. And per the title of the game, they sometimes make out. And it was such a great game. You know, I feel like in a lot of games, we don't usually take the time to do genuine romance between characters. We don't often take the time to explore relationships that are not like super heated and intense, you know, and we don't often take time to do like, you know, physical intimacy, like outside of a metaphor or just like immediately fading to black, you know? And so, but we did that in this game and it was great. Like it was just really nice. And after it was over, everybody was, you know, we were all kind of talking about how like, I really needed that in my gaming right now. Like just feeling like this earnest approach to romance between these two characters. It just, I don't know, felt great. It was good.
Very cool. All right, Marissa, what's giving you feels?
Yeah, who doesn't love hot guys being hot? Sounds great. Well, I guess right now I've been really excited to play in my Blades in the Dark campaign. Basically, I'm playing a female version of Thomas Shelby from Peaky Blinders, and it's been a blast. So, luckily I don't have the same problems as my character, but that's kind of what makes it fun. Like, in real life, I'm an only child, and in this I have like a bunch of family and family drama, and I'm trying to take over the city, and it's great. Yeah, it's been really cool to watch that roller coaster of coming back from war and taking over the family business and changing it in a different direction. So that's been fun.
Cool. Mine's not happy, and I feel like I'm out of sync with everybody now.
That's good.
We've been playing Apocalypse World 2nd Edition recently, and I'm playing a hard holder who's, she's got a good hard stat, but she's really about, like, her family and keeping everyone together and really promoting community. And this dude showed up, and she welcomed him into the community, and then he decided to, like, break a law somewhere else and almost invite war into the community because it was all about him and not the community as a whole. And clearly that can't stand. But that's kind of been happening in my real life lately in terms of the conventions I've been running and stuff, where there's been a lot of toxic dudes doing toxic shit, and I was just like, oh good, but this one I get to hurt.
I like the idea, Kate, of you as a convention hard holder.
That's my badge actually at Fan Expo, is the hard holder.
Is it really?
Yeah. Things are going to go great for you.
I roll so many 7 to 9s. This week I wanted to talk about GMing Masterclass in a way, not in the way of like the way it's always presented at Fan Expo as a bunch of dudes on a panel, but a lot of times whenever I go to cons, people are always like asking the standard GMing questions, which are always, how do I deal with a problem player, essentially? And I was like, you know what? I want to talk to someone who's considered an expert GM and someone who everyone raves about and their GMing skills. And naturally, therefore, Marissa was invited on the show.
Surprise to me.
Everyone talks about it in the Gauntlet Slack. Everyone's like, Marissa's like the best GM ever. So that's your award. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. That's very nice.
We try. And we're going to talk about some things I find experienced GMs tend to struggle with more than just, you know, our beginner GMs who have our beginner questions. So might as well dive in. How do we learn to step back, trust the story, and let go when we're GMing? How do we give in as opposed to try to, like, put it into cookie cutter sizes where we want themes and story to go. What are your thoughts on that, Marissa?
Well, I think first try it. That's probably a good step, because I tend to find that awesome things happen when you let the trains off the tracks, like train wrecks. I mean, who doesn't love watching that? Like, you know, when it's not a real train and nobody's actually getting hurt.
Fair.
Yeah, I'd say there are certain systems that certainly might feel like letting go is kind of hurting the party, but this isn't, you know, then try it, letting go in different ways. So the systems will let you, you know, push and pull in different ways and support you in different ways, and try again. But I think just trust that it's going to be pretty fun, and that your players have a responsibility to also make it fun. So if they're not doing their job, just sort of poke them. Like, hey, we're trying this, so what do you want to do? How cool is that? I find that leading questions are a pretty nice tool if you're looking for actual tools to put on your belt. If you feel like there's sort of a stall, or your players are confused about what you're trying to do by letting them go, you know, be like, so why is this door sealed and locked by elder gods? And they're like, oh my god. It's sealed and locked by elder gods, and now I have to figure out why. You know, and just go full speed ahead.
Cool. Jason, what are your thoughts on letting go?
Yeah, Marissa, I'm glad you bring up like system a little bit, because I do think I think it's certainly easier when the system supports it, right? So for example, Monster Hearts, I find it really easy to just let the characters kind of roam about and do what they want to do.
Totally.
I usually just I let them frame most of the scenes. I just kind of call balls and fouls and stuff and play NPCs. And it's easy in that system because I find that the moves, they drive the fiction in a certain way, right? So once a move gets triggered, like, you know, fiction is happening and things are going on, and you just kind of like follow all those little snowballs or whatever. So it's pretty straightforward. I sometimes have to do, I call it playing in the corridor, not on rails. Like you can walk about in the corridor, but you're still going to the end of the corridor. I sometimes have to do that style of play in something more mission oriented, like Dungeon World or Monster of the Week, right? Especially because I organize games in short amounts of sessions, like maybe 4 sessions, you know, at a time. And so I feel the need to like get to have like a little story arc going, you know, and give them like some finality and some conclusion. And so I do sometimes like think about like a basic overall story plan for something like Dungeon World or Monster of the Week or The Sprawl. But even then, I think there are things you can do to sort of invite the players into your prep, which is kind of what Marissa was getting at there, I think. Asking lots of questions about why their character is involved in this mission. I have a technique that I do a lot where if I am interested in a theme, like if I really want to hit on a certain theme or outlook for an NPC, I will have the players like give me some of that, right? So if I have an NPC who's, you know, motivated by the loss of their child or something like that, I might say, hey, as you walk into this person's apartment, like what do you see in her apartment that lets you know she's still dealing with that loss or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And let them kind of fill that in just so they feel like they're involved in my prep, right?
Yeah, I think asking, why are you excited to go down this corridor that I am leading you down, is a perfectly reasonable question, as silly as it sounds, to get your players to know that they're supposed to be engaged in going on this journey, that, you know, the door is not necessarily the only obstacle, but, you know, building a story on the way there.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. I found something that really helped me in terms of learning to follow my players instead of trying to just tell my players, hey, here's a corridor, was in Apocalypse World, they tell you for the opening session, just follow them around and shit will happen because they're the main characters and they're going to do stupid shit and then they're going to roll 6 and everything's going to be great. That was the big lesson for me. It was just be like, let's just follow them. Stop telling them what's happening and just be like, okay, what are you doing today? What's happening? What do you want to do in this scene? And giving them agency to make those decisions themselves instead of being like, okay, I'm going to hit you with problem after problem until one of these things is something you find interest in.
Yeah, and even then, though, like sometimes the players do look at you and expect you to say something, right, and have a reaction. And I think that's where, not so much like, to me, it's the difference between like being prepared and like writing an adventure, right? Like, the fronts in most Apocalypse World games, right? That's your tool set for when you do have to do something, right, as a GM and make a decision like that. Even just like kind of critically thinking about your setting, maybe you have like no intention of like having a preset adventure or an A to B, story or whatever, but just, asking yourself some critical questions about NPC motivations and kind of, I used to do a little exercise where I would create 7 NPCs or locations, right? Give them each a motivation and maybe think about what they look like and just have those like in the back of my mind in case I needed something.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think knowing your world can only help you feel more secure letting things go off the rails, because
exactly.
you won't be surprised by how things react necessarily, because oh, well, if you violate this sacred tree by tripping over a root, it'll probably get mad and things will start rising from the ground and you'll have issues there.
Absolutely. I think I use air quotes around loyalty, but loyalty to the world is what makes it easiest for me to let people kind of go do their thing. Like, I know what the world's going to do and I know how it's going to respond. And yeah, if you poke the hanging tree, it's totally going to try and hang you. That's just how it goes. But please poke it. So I think it was actually one of the first episodes I did with Jason, where we were talking about emotional play. And Jason said something like, make sure you let scenes breathe. Because players don't know what they're doing and they stumble around until they finally figure out how to make this scene evocative and emotional for them. And I think that's actually one of the things I didn't even think about until Jason said it on that episode. So it's been almost a year of me doing this technique. Which is letting people breathe in a scene. How do you guys let people breathe?
Yeah, you're right. Players, you are not often dealing with people who are writers or improv actors, right? And so, especially if you're having like a really cool like interpersonal scene or some dialogue going on, it can take a little bit, right? It can take a little bit for them to kind of find what the purpose of the scene is and to kind of figure out their words. And it was hard. Like, it took me a really long time to kind of like sit back as a GM, because I always feel that pressure of like, I have to get in there and make everybody have fun. Like, we need to all be having fun and we need to hurry this scene up, right? Like, that's kind of like racing in the back of my mind. I have a couple of things I do. If I know we're having a big emotional scene or a big like kind of social conflict coming up that's going to require the players to think a little bit about what they're going to say in character, I sometimes take a break. I sometimes take a little 2-minute, 3-minute break, just a little bio break, but it gives them a chance to kind of think about it a little bit. If we're playing a game that has read a person, I'll sometimes get the read a person fired off first so that they can be thinking about their questions and how those questions might inform what they want to say to the other character. You can't always do that, but I like that a lot. And I just kind of, I don't completely hang back in, like when I'm letting a scene breathe. I do sometimes like interject a little bit, like to ask a follow-up question and say, oh, well, when character Y said that just now, like how did that make you feel? Right? Like that kind of thing.
Marissa, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think my biggest thing was deciding which scenes need that and which don't. And I think I've landed on what you as the GM find interesting as the answer. If the PCs are boring you, move on. Because, that's a way to get your group, to get your GM style down. Like, they will learn. They're not idiots. And this is, they have responsibilities too, like I mentioned before. And I think one of them is to be interesting and to make the story fun and interesting. Not to be perfect and have like awesome dialogue no matter what. But, if this not what you're wanting out of the scene, you don't really have a responsibility to make a scene breathe that you don't want to breathe.
I think that's totally fair. One of my famous phrases with my players, and when I say my players, that's a big group of people, right? But one of the phrases that I used to always say is like, "Can I just jump in for a second and find out where this scene is going?" I'll just kind of jump in and ask that question. It's a little assertive, right? But it does kind of like remind the players, like, oh, there needs to be a point here a little bit, so I think that's okay to do sometimes. So you'll know, right? That's one of the things you figure out as you GM, right?
Yeah. I tend to do the cool, so that happens.
Yeah, I've used that line. I know what that line means.
Or, okay, while that's happening, and then I move over to somebody else. So that's sort of like what you said by taking a break, but we're just taking a break from that scene and going on to another one. And we can come back in if they're like, interrupt me, and they're like, oh, wait, before we move on, I wanted to say this killer line. Cool, say the killer line, I'm ready.
Cuts are key, right? I was recently playing in a game and they were letting every scene play out to its conclusion before, and not cutting. And we talked about it afterwards. I was like, I think you should cut between scenes, like back and forth, because it just helps you avoid like 20-minute long, huge long scenes where everybody's just twiddling their thumbs at a certain point. So yeah, smash cuts are great.
Yeah, I think having to do so many play tests may have warped my sense of that, because I would never think about doing that now, but it's because I'm like, all right, I need you to trigger some stuff.
Right, yeah.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I found in those scenes I'll usually stop and be like, so what are you trying to get out of this? Like, what is your goal? And if you're not heading there, how can I help you? And if you're not going to get there, let's acknowledge that and move on.
Yeah, and sometimes a player will say, oh, well, what I want to convey here is that character X is ABC, and I'd like to do D. And then you can kind of just say, okay, well, let's just say you've conveyed all that. And now, are we firing off a move here? You can kind of just cut to the chase, so.
Yeah, I think that's with any scene where a character's stalling or the scene has breathed and nothing's happening. You're like, okay, what are you doing?
Yeah.
If the answer is you don't know, we're moving on.
Yeah, and I think setting expectations ahead of time for stuff like that will really ease that, if that sounds harsh, which is, like, for con games, it's really easy to do. I set the whole game by being like, hey, so we don't have very much time, and if you can try and get together in a scene, do that. Even if it doesn't quite make sense for your character yet, we can come up with a reason together. And if you do go off by yourself, that's cool, but you will not get as much screen time. And then you have that. Everybody knows why you're cutting away from the person who's alone and really wants to have that scene. It's because you set that expectation of there's all these other people, and we're going to have very little time to do this.
That's really smart. I'm all about expectation setting, but I'd never thought of that particular type of expectation setting. That's pretty great.
Right? I'm sitting here going, I say that to myself all the time. I don't think I've ever made it clear to my players
I've never expressed it to the players. Yeah.
See, you are the best GM.
I don't know about that, but thank you. I do think that there's, especially at a convention, you don't know the other people, they don't know you. And so it's really easy to take things personally that have literally nothing to do with you. So something like, hey, if you're alone and I'm not spending time on you, this is why, can be helpful.
Fair. More than fair. I hadn't thought of that. I'm going to steal that. One of the things many of us struggle with is killing our darlings, or the sacred cow, or whatever phrase you want to use for the one thing that we're protecting as a GM in our game, and the players want to interact with it and or destroy it, and we don't let them because we're like, I love this NPC character that I've developed so dearly to my heart. I don't know. I don't struggle with this, so
I don't either. I would say, like, this is not a problem I have. So I could talk about why it's not a problem for me, but yeah.
I think that's going to be the focus. It did come up a lot when people were like, oh yeah, experienced GMs totally do this thing where they have like a GM character and all that, and I'm like, really?
Oh yeah, the
okay.
Gandalf or whatever that leads everybody around,
all
right? Yeah.
I'm glad you know, because this doesn't happen to me.
It's definitely a big thing in the circles that I've run.
Oh, okay. So what do you do about it?
Well, usually I'm a player when it happens, so I would say if you're a player and it's happening and you're unhappy, talk to the GM on the side. Like, just, during a break or in between sessions, be like, dude, this is annoying me. But as a GM, I would say just keep in mind, as the good book tells you, be a fan of your PCs and keep your NPCs in the crosshairs. But if you want things that are a little more tangible, just trying to keep in mind that your PCs are helping you tell the story, but the story is about them and not you or your pets. But if you can't resist that, to try and make your pet NPCs change into supporting roles, have them constantly check in with your NPCs or maybe like fall in love with them, so that the coolness of your pet or, you know, item, person, whatever they are, that their coolness is sort of funneled through a PC. So that if there's major decisions to be made, they can be altered by one of the players rather than just an autonomous character. So that one of the PCs can pull its strings more than the other, will allow you to be as cool as you want, but know when the group wants to apply pressure to them. Because maybe some of them actually do enjoy the pet NPC. So having one character that it's sort of attached to will allow them to apply pressure to that PC to then apply pressure to your NPC.
That's smart. I take that.
My answer is to make them love your darlings as much as you do and then kill them. It's like the best thing to do. Like, there's like, I mean, my favorite thing to do to just sort of, I don't know, to have those big, like, you know, gasp moments at the table is to have a really awesome NPC that they love and then find a way to murder them. And it's even better if, like, the characters, it's their fault why the NPC died. I love that style of play, and that's how I do it. You know, I don't have a chance to do darlings too much because, like I said earlier, I don't do lots of long-term campaigns, but I occasionally do. And, you know, sometimes I have a character, like right now in my Monster Hearts game, which is crossing over with Cthulhu Dark and other games too. I have a character that appears occasionally called Big Man. He's a villain. And he's not the kind of villain that, like, is directly antagonizing the player characters, and so they don't have a huge, like, reason to want to, like, get rid of him or whatever, but they've had opportunities to, and I think the reason why they haven't is because they just like the NPC, you know, like, they like when he's on screen, they like to interact with him. It's kind of like what Marissa was saying. They like to have those connections with the NPC, and so I'm cool with that. I mean, if they seem to like it, I'm not gonna burn that NPC until the time is right. But generally, yeah, I don't have darlings. I like to set them up and knock them down.
Yeah, fair. I find I don't really have darlings. I do have NPCs I love dearly because I think they're really cool and they do cool things. And I try to make sure that they're always in, like, that triangle relationship that they really recommend, where it's PC, NPC, PC. And I try to make sure that I kill them when it would hurt the most, which I think is the discussion about why should you kill your darlings, right? Like, what do we get out of killing these characters that we're attached to or we think are really cool? It sounds like we're kind of coming up with, well, it's emotionally evocative, right? Like, it pulls those strings. It creates those moments where PCs are risking themselves to save these NPCs because they're so attached to them.
Yeah, I love that moment. I love that moment when you when you endanger an NPC and the player character's like, against all self-motivation or self-preservation instincts, they want to help that NPC, right? Like, I think when that happens is, like, really great. And then you just fingers crossed they fail and can't save the NPC.
Roll a 6.
Six.
I'm sensing a theme here.
Come on, 6-. Come on, 6-.
I do think that if you want to gamify it for yourself as the GM, even with running games over, like, most GMs tend to run a lot of games where GMs don't actually rotate as much as player groups from what I've found. And I think one of the best bits of advice that I got was to try and top yourself again and again and again. So I was, running into trouble. I'm like, oh, I'm so bored of running this game. I run the same adventure and oh my God, where's the nearest trash can? I want to slit my wrists. And I've just, like, was kind of hopeless and like, well, try and top yourself every time. And I was like, that's actually pretty motivating. And I think the biggest thing that comes from writing, designing, and doing it professionally that GMs are actually doing professionally, but they don't really get paid for it always, is that this will not be the coolest NPC you come up with. It is not your best NPC. And to just trust that the next NPC you bring in is going to be awesome. Some of them are going to be the coolest NPCs ever and will never get used, and that's fine. So, just be cool.
But what about the NPCs that we hold sacred because they're a linchpin of plot?
Is that a system requirement or
yeah,
a...
that's my I had a similar thought. Like, why are they a linchpin of the plot?
To be fair, I am talking about when I've played many D&D games and someone won't let you kill a sacred character because if you do, you're going to unravel their long plot too soon.
Sure. And I don't think killing NPCs off is necessarily the most effective always either for wrenching their hearts. You make them disappear somehow or they leave you on purpose. They're like, you guys are murder hobos, peace. That can also be pretty devastating and they come back later or whatever. But again, I would just say funnel it through a PC. Make sure that whatever character is there is tied to one of the people that is an actual player at your table. So that when in character that they have levers and things to push on to show you what directions they want to go.
For sure. Yeah, I think I dig it. And I'm going to ask everyone, because this is a thing I find really interesting that comes up in conversation, is when people say, be a fan of your PCs. What does that mean to you as a GM? Because it comes off a little bit differently for every GM.
I think it depends on the game that you're playing a little bit, but generally speaking, I think it means not being afraid to challenge them. Like, be challenging, push back against the things that they love. If they and then, like, when they step up to the plate, make sure they have opportunities to be, they have opportunities to be successful. They have opportunities to look cool and do cool things, and give them the benefit of their roles. I don't like when GMs like steal roles, right? Like, it fucks me.
Yeah, I think whatever, like, I kind of agree that the type of game you're playing will somewhat dictate what that manifests as, but that ultimately, if your character concept is a D&D elven archer, let them be that thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So it would be playing to their strengths and their weaknesses, like Jason was saying, and making sure you let them shine and let them brood, and that's being a fan of your player character's story more than your players, right? If you're being a fan of your players, like, yeah, care about the people at your table. That's probably good practice.
I want to call out real quick our friend, our Canadian game design friend, Fraser Simons, who wrote The Veil, who I play with like every week. And we play Dungeon World together, and he always wants to do these Assassin's Creed, Legolas, like, jumping around ninja skill shot moves, because that's what he likes to do. And he likes to narrate it like the camera swoops in and we see this happening and that happening, and then the camera fades away and I spin around. He loves it, and we all kind of love it too because he loves it. I mean, I think that's part of it, right? Like, just when, like, even if it feels a little like broad for what you're doing in the scene, you never want to, like, I don't know. I think there is a little bit of a connection between being a fan of the characters and the players in that way.
For sure, yeah. I think for me, it always means let them be awesome, right? Like, let them have their moment in the spotlight and let those moments be really great, but also let them have moments in the spotlight that suck, but make it about them.
Just to defend having darlings for a moment, I think that if you are getting smashed by the PCs at all times, they might not be having fun either, because they can't be real heroes if there's no adversity to overcome. So having, a badass Sith Lord who doesn't take shit and, like, steals away your lightsaber and jets off to the edge of the galaxy for you not to see for a few whiles, that can actually be really rewarding. So having darlings can actually create the situations in which heroes can really shine.
Very fair. When it comes to reading the table, how do you keep track of how your players are doing? What body language are you looking for? And when do you know to check in and when to just, like, let them do their thing? Caring about the people at your table moves.
We should have segued to this earlier, Kate. Gosh, what a missed opportunity.
I know, right? Not on it tonight. My headache's just not winning.
No, it's just teasing. Uh-huh. I'm a big believer in setting expectations. I have a whole procedure that I go through, my CATS procedure. It's CATS, concept, aim, tone, subject matter. I like to go through all that stuff at the outset because it establishes a relationship with me and the table that is, it's a relationship where I'm clearly being very open about I want them to know what we're all doing, right? And it kind of invites them to advocate for themselves, right? Like if they need a break or they need, they have a question or they want to like challenge something or whatever, right? So I think that's important. I think breaks are terrific for checking in with folks. I take a lot of breaks. I take way more breaks than Kate does. I know that's established fact.
No breaks.
Yeah, I take a break every hour.
You get one break and it's after character creation.
I take a break every hour. I like to take breaks and check in during the breaks if I think I need to. And I mostly play online. And so something I do, and this is I'm revealing some truth here to the players I play with, and they don't know this about me. My break is a little bit longer than their break. I take about 2 extra minutes, and I sit down when they're all back, and I listen to their chatter surreptitiously.
You're not the only one. I also do this when I'm running online. Yeah.
It's a great tool. Why not? It's there. I mean, like I listen to what they're saying just a little bit, and to get a sense of like it's for me. Like because you can kind of pick up like on what they're really interested in and kind of what they're thinking, right? It's a slightly unguarded moment. I mean, I have a feeling they're not going to say anything bad about me personally because it's still being recorded and stuff, right? Like they're not like going to like be saying things that they wouldn't want other people to hear. But I find that, just waiting a minute off camera and listening for a bit, super informative. I'm glad to hear you do that too, Kate.
Yeah, no, I totally
It makes me
do.
feel like less of a creeper.
Yeah, it happened by accident the first time. I was running Monster Hearts and I sat down and I put my earphones in. I'm like, oh, they're talking.
Me
I'm
too.
Listen to this.
That's how it happened to me too. I sat down. I was like, oh.
That's cool. Okay.
Yeah.
I have a feeling you're going to have a hard time keeping that up if they listen to your podcast, but I definitely agree that setting expectations is important, and I think those expectations change between con games and home games. Because with people these sorts of things, reading your players is probably going to be a lot easier than total strangers, I would presume. Like, so for example, there's sort of, with friends, there's generally always in play X card or like content, alert where they're just like, hey man, no, let's not do that. Because they're comfortable with you enough to say that and be cool with, and know that you're not going to react in a shitty way. I think during con games, I don't worry about reading their body language very much because I've set expectations and I play with an X card, and at the end I do Roses and Thorns, which I can talk about in a bit. But for the X card, for example, most games I'm like, hey, this is a tool for you to use, whatever. But if I'm playing something pretty intense like Bluebeard, where I need them to be scared, I need them to freak out, and I need that like creepiness factor, I rely completely on the X card. And if I'm at a convention, I will not let people who are not comfortable playing with the X card play at my game. And I say this all, I take a break, I tell them that the host will, or whoever is around, will seat them in another game. I try and make it as non-coercive as possible, and that they don't have to be like, peace right there in front of everybody in an embarrassing way. But I do make them take care of themselves, because in a game where I'm supposed to scare you, I'm going to try and push scaring myself, which limits are pretty high. And just let them take care of themselves. And like, that's what I'm doing. Sometimes I can X card myself. I'm like, okay, actually that was fucked up. I'm not going to do that. And that's a cool way of modeling that using the X card is cool. And just for people who don't know what the X card is, because I just sort of took that as, hey, people must know. It just is a card that you can say, I don't like this content, let's erase it, and we're all very creative people, so it's not a problem, we'll come up with something else. If I'm like, oh, there's spiders trickling down from the ceiling, and oh no, I'm arachnophobic, like, nope. Or they just don't want to explain themselves, that's fine. Cool, there's ooze coming down from the ceiling, and we move on. I think that checking in all the time can be really disruptive to certain games, like just anything horror related, or
where tension is something you're going
exactly
for. Yeah.
All the tension, or just for me personally, I get annoyed. I'm like, dude, if I wasn't okay, I'd tell you have all these fucking tools for me. Why are you asking? I was having a good time. I don't get very emotional during movies, and the only time that my partner saw me cry during a movie, he paused it, and he was like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "What are you doing? Unpause it now, you monster! You're ruining my moment here." I was moved, right? And so I think it's just important to let people do their thing.
Yeah, I agree. I'll check in if I think I need to, like if something particularly gnarly just happened or whatever, and I saw some visible like discomfort or whatever. But yeah, generally, letting the players advocate for themselves, I think, is going to be the most efficient way of handling it. And that's the beauty of like safety tools and like my CATS procedure that I use, and because it kind of it gives them permission to do it. It allows them to like advocate for themselves, and it lets you focus on the game. Right. And that's kind of like, that's the space I like to operate in. So.
Yeah. As the GM, it's not your job to babysit them. It's your job to run a game for them. So, give them the tools they need to be successful and let it ride.
I think that's fair. I think for me, because I'm also a community organizer and I have this extra weird level of responsibility.
There's that extra little bit too. Yeah.
For these people, that I tend to be a little bit more focused on how they're doing. I also have this weird reputation of being like a caregiver I have to uphold. But I find, because I've been running Crossroads, which is very, it's not super happy. When I'm running it and I'm doing something that's particularly squicky or not going to be okay, I would be a little nervous about it if I were the player. I just make sure like I push the X card a little bit further in their direction. It's just like, I'm not stopping, I'm not checking, I'm just letting you know it's totally okay to hit this while I talk about this at you. And I found that's a good way to invite people. It's like, I'm conscious of what I'm doing is gross, but I'm not stopping unless you hit this. I don't stop. Like, I'm not like, okay, let's pause this moment that's really terrible, give you a moment to breathe before I'm like, okay, no, let's get back into this moment where someone's beating the shit out of you because you're a different person. And I found that very effective for con running, where it's like, you are actively moving the X card around and like letting people know this is a safe tool to use. And I try to use it at the beginning of every game.
Yeah, it's a good way to model.
I X card something.
Yeah, the other thing I do is roses and thorns. At the end of every game, I go around the table and have people name one thing they liked and one thing they didn't. And I tend to try and keep it short and have only clarifying questions, no rebuttals or, anything like that. And just to give everyone a chance to give themselves a voice. And a lot of times people just want to be heard. And then they're cool. You don't actually have to do anything about it, but listen to them, and everything's cool.
Yep.
And it gives you a chance to work on your GMing style because, I didn't know I was doing that, having a pet NPC thing, and it was annoying people. It just gives you an insight, like listening into someone's conversation, but they have a moment to sort of form their thoughts. Yeah, they have a moment to form their thoughts. Yeah.
Except they have some agency.
It's consensual.
It's consensual.
My biggest thing, too, is to just forgive yourself if you fuck it up. Just do it again. Fuck them. Do it again. This should not be the last game you run, even if you fucked up.
Yeah, that's a huge space for people, because I don't think I know anybody who isn't anxious before they GM. Even on a small level, people are usually like, oh shit, I gotta GM something. To the point where we put like a self-care segment in like the handbook that for our cons that we run. It's like, we've got your back. We can support you if you can't handle GMing, but we're gonna make you GM. Right? So giving yourself permission is a big one. And also with Roses and Thorns, if you've had a particularly emotionally intensive game and there was some betrayal or some PvP going on, I find sometimes people will use Roses and Thorns to unintentionally unpack what just happened. It'll turn into this discussion about the emotionality at the table. And if I've had a newer GM witness that and then try to take that all onto themselves. And I was like, no, that wasn't about you. Right, that was about something else, and people got sidetracked, and next time maybe just try to keep them on point with Roses and Thorns. But if your players divulge into this, like, oh my god, I can't believe this happened, and god, you're such a fucker, and like, really getting into that space, as the GM, you're also allowed to not put that on yourself, right? they got PvP and it hurt each other. Like, you're allowed to say, like, y'all sort that out.
Yeah, no, and I think that's why, I guess, suppose if I'm doing Roses and Thorns as a GM, I'm also facilitating it. And that means it's my responsibility to, hey, we're trying to keep this brief, or ask the clarifying question, is this about him? Because that sounds kind of pointed. And they're like, oh, no. So, like, to sort of manage that at your table as you see fit. Totally.
Cool. All right. Picking your game. How do you know what game to choose? How do you avoid just slamming your ideas into a game that ain't going to work for you?
I'm not actually sure how to answer this question, because my own like game picking process, I run games basically like as if I was at a convention. I have rotating players. I don't have the same players every month. I don't, even from week to week, I might have different players in a different game. And so I just run whatever I'm personally interested in, because I can't imagine any other way of like picking a game at this point. And I guess, yeah, I mean, you always want to make sure that if you're going for like a particular kind of setting or genre or something, I guess like having a game that has like really good, strong textual and mechanical support for that is great. But they kind of feel like two different conversations to me in a way, like one is like, what do you present to the players in picking a game? And then the other is like, how do you pick what you're interested in doing, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's very important that the GM is interested in running the game.
Right,
because
yeah. I don't just run anything because like my players, like 'cause players want it. I run it because I want to run it.
Yeah,
right?
That'll probably shine through if you're uninterested. But I do think it's helpful for home games to, especially if you're not playtesting or running a bunch of one-shots or doing anything, like if you're going to do a campaign, to choose one that the whole group is on board for, and or that can be easily researched. So, for example, I find that a lot of sci-fi games can go off the rails a lot sooner than other games because people don't have a touchstone and they're nervous about what is acceptable during a game and what isn't. And that ranges from setting to they can't imagine what is going on, right? And that makes it very hard to embody a character and have them act in that world with any certainty. So, for example, if you're doing a sci-fi game and somebody is on board, but they don't know the book, right? They haven't read the book, they don't know the setting. Just be like, anything that would happen in Blade Runner can happen here. And then they can go and watch Blade Runner. And everyone can go and watch Blade Runner because it's a great movie. And then you come back and you have a touchstone of like, okay, I think I know what my character could do in this situation because I know how the technology works in Blade Runner, so I can invent a thing, what it would look, I can envision what it would look like for my character to do X, Y, and Z in this setting.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's an interesting point because I am that sucker who will run shit for people who ask me to, even though I don't like the game. It like, I have problems. Like, I love Monster Hearts. It's one of my favorite games ever, but after I've played 7 games of it in a row, like, I just don't want to play more Monster Hearts for a while. And I'm always the one people like, Kate, will you run Monster Hearts for me? And I end up saying, sure. And then we run, like, 3 episodes, and I'm like, all right, you all die, we're done. Right.
School below that.
Yeah. So I think choosing the game is much better when there's definitely everyone's buying in. Or I find what happens a lot is one of your friends is super interested in this game and some of you are like, vampires aren't my jam, but Undying looks kind of cool, so I guess. And what we do then is everyone talks about, in this case it's Undying, half of us are sold and half of us are like, yeah, I don't know, man. I'm not into VTM, but okay. We all choose a point of vampire fiction that we really, really like, and we make sure everyone is at least familiar with it, so there's a shared tone that we're already going for. And I found that's a good way to get buy-in, is if everyone's like, here's, as Marissa mentioned, like a cultural touchstone that like, this is what I think of vampires. Can we incorporate this part somehow into this game? That's been very helpful. In terms of trying to like push my idea into a game, that's always really failed me. That's never gone well for me. I've now hit a point where I'm just like, I will just go research a game that does what I want. Like, I'm not going to try anymore. I'm done. Unless it's the Powered by the Apocalypse game I can make a custom move for, I am done.
Same. Yep, same. There are so many games out there now. If you want to explore, the horrors of colonialism, you can go play Dog Eat Dog. I think I mentioned this last time we had this episode. If, there's so many options. Just do the research and find the game that's going to work for what you're interested in exploring, right? I'm a big believer that, like, outside of, like, maybe universal systems, like GURPS or whatever, that most games, like, want to be doing a specific thing, right? And I think that's the best way to experience them.
I agree, but for those people who don't have the time or the care to do that, I would say, or maybe the resources, I would probably tell you to be flexible in your shoehorning, to making sure that you fit the thing, whatever the cool, exciting thing to you is, into your setting will make the game better, always. So it's not necessarily... Maybe I'm getting around the question by saying that it's not necessarily shoehorning if you're flexible about how it manifests in your world. So if you really need this, like, ancient ruins in your setting that they stumble upon, a hot spring of wild monkeys who grant wishes, you're like, I really need this in my game, and you're playing, let's say you're still playing Blade Runner, you can just be flexible about how that manifests. You're like, okay, so you walk into this place and there's, like, these ads all around, and you walk into this door and in front of you there's, like, steaming pools, but you can just walk on the surface and there's, like, virtual things assisting you, but one of those virtual things is real, and someone does, like, a test to discern realities in your room, and then you're like, oh, cool, that thing is real. Let's go make a wish, rub the lamp or whatever.
Yeah, for me, I think sometimes asking questions about why I want certain things in the game. So if I want my hot springs of magic wish granting monkeys, in my game I'd be like, okay, but why does this need to be in the game? What is it about this location or these monkeys or this wish that is important?
Right. And
distill it down to the core of what that is and find out how I can incorporate that into a different type of setting.
Exactly.
So maybe it's not going to be monkeys. It might be, robots, but it is what it is, right? So
there's something intrinsic and fundamental about wish-granting monkeys that you're trying to capture, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so finding that intrinsic element and then using that as your guiding touchstone instead of the monkey.
And reskinning it.
I don't like monkeys.
But hopefully not reskinning monkeys, or skinning or otherwise.
Anything else you want to add to that?
I don't think so.
All right. So we've all read tons of gaming books. It's the way it is nowadays. What's the one or two games you would say, go pick this up and read this GMing section?
I think if you're doing, if you're interested in Powered by the Apocalypse games specifically, I think you should pick up Urban Shadows. I think Urban Shadows does a really, really fine job of explaining lots of things that get a little hand-waved in other PBTA games. So, for example, I didn't really understand PvP in PBTA games until I read Urban Shadows. That was kind of when I solved it and figured it out, As far as like GMing sections, which I really love, I like Dogs in the Vineyards GM section a lot. It was a big inspiration for me in how I just kind of plan my games as a general matter.
Marissa?
Yeah, I think if you're looking for sort of next level stuff, I would definitely recommend Apocalypse World. It fixes things that players do naturally via holding environment, or, hey, can I overhear them? Yeah, because there's like 200 of us in this, sprawl, so of course you can be there. And keeping NPCs in the crosshairs kind of solves the, like, oh, what do I do? My characters are murder hobos, so I'll just let them kill everything. And how do I let my players be the best? Well, the playbooks are set up to let them be the gunlugger and stuff like that. So it sets up a really nice frame for things that people do naturally, like makes them into rules and principles and agendas that you can follow clearly. But I also would have to plug Mouse Guard and Burning Wheel if you're looking for some fun, like crunch and let's fucking GM, because they're great. So like there's a GM turn and a player turn for Mouse Guard, and who doesn't love adorable, brave mice? Burning Wheel has these life paths, and NPC generation and burning up a character is really cool because you can introduce NPC during play and then go back and burn them up after the first session and be like, wow, they're even cooler than I thought they were. And everything is connected, so that can be really fun for a lot of GMs.
Awesome. Mine's obviously also Urban Shadows because it's the one game everyone who asks me, how do you GM? I'm like, just go read Urban Shadows. That's how I GM. The other one I would say is Monster Hearts because I think Avery has a very interesting grasp of Powered by the Apocalypse games, and I love reading her writing on it. But if you want to do more like PvP emotional play, I think Monster Hearts has some really good guides on how to facilitate that as a GM. That being said, I haven't fully read Monster Hearts 2 yet because I've been busy. So I am referring to Monster Hearts 1.
Yeah, I've run 8 sessions of Monster Hearts 2 and have not read the book yet.
Me too!
I've been doing it all in the Trick or Treat PDFs that came out during the Kickstarter.
One day, though. One day.
Yeah.
Cool. So why don't we go to Giving Me Life?
Hi, listeners. I want to interject real quickly to remind you that Gauntlet Con is taking place October 20th through the 22nd. Gauntlet Con is an online gaming convention. We have over 100 gaming events for you to join. Early registration for Gauntlet Patreon supporters is taking place right now. Leading up to Gauntlet Con, our zine, Codex, will be holding a writing contest called Keepers of the Gauntlet. For this contest, we're asking you to write a Dungeon World starter or OSR scenario. There is a $100 cash prize for the winner, and the winning scenario will be published in Codex and be featured on one of our podcasts. Up to 2 runners-up will receive a $50 cash prize. Anyone can participate. The deadline for submissions is October 16th. For more details, find the link in our show notes or go to gauntlet-rpg.com. Thanks.
It's Giving Me Life. Jason, what's Giving You Life?
Well, if we're going by the list here, mine follows up naturally from yours, I think.
All right.
So I think you should go first.
Okay. So in a happy turn of events on Canadian Netflix, RuPaul's Drag Race Season 8 was added. And I had never really had any interest in watching it until I listened to Jason talking about it. And then I took a weird test to find out who I was, and it didn't mean anything to me. So then I decided to watch it, and it changed my life. Those women can contour. Like, it's so impressive, the amount of makeup they can put on their face and look fabulous in. It delights me. And then I watched season 9 just so I could understand the jokes that Jason was making. And it's just made me so happy. So I'm now watching season 7. I'm going backwards because there's no more to go forward to.
Wait till you get to 6. 6 is the best season, bar none, of all of them.
I'm so excited.
Yeah. 6 is like they're all pretty good, but 6 is like the real high watermark. I'm so excited by that. I'm a huge fan of RuPaul's Drag Race, as everybody knows who listens to the show. And my thing Giving Me Life is actually kind of on the other side of that in a certain way, which is I'm on the subreddit for RuPaul's Drag Race, the main subreddit. And I love it. I love the RuPaul's Drag Race subreddit. Like, if you're a deep fan of Drag Race and like you follow it really closely, the subreddit is like a joy. Like, especially right now when they're in between seasons, they just kind of like, it's just a group of people that kind of indulge in their love of Drag Race with like stupid memes, and they follow all the chatter and like, oh, this queen's going to be here in this city. Let's go, this queen's going to be over here, or trying to anticipate who's going to be cast on the next season, like all that stuff. So, it's a really positive, as RuPaul would expect. It's a really positive, like, self-affirming, like, subreddit. You can't say that about a lot of subreddits, but you can about that one. And I'm very deep into it right now at this moment.
Just so you know, Jason, Kim Chi and Sasha Velour and Naomi Smalls are going to be in Toronto next week.
You should go watch them.
I can't go. I'm away that night, but I'm so sad when I found out and I couldn't go. Marissa, what's Giving You Life? Is it RuPaul's Drag Race?
It should be, apparently.
Right?
Yeah, no, right now it's just the blood of the innocent.
What?
No. I do, well, because I can't get enough of work, I'm going to say that it's my field work that's giving me life lately. I got back from hunting dinosaurs all over the basins of Montana and Wyoming, and I can't wait to go back, because who doesn't love dinosaurs? And if you don't know it, Montana and Wyoming dirt is really pretty. It's just rejuvenating. Walking around for 12 hours in the hot sun and trying to stay hydrated is just awesome.
It's actually really funny to hear you say that because I'm playing your Painted Desert World in the Warren right now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm doing that one right now, and I love how much you love the natural environment. Like that comes through really strongly in that little play set. So
yeah. I'm a little obsessed, but I'm glad it was funneled through productive bunnies.
Awesome. Well, thank you so very much for being on the show and joining us to talk about, I call it like GMing 201 instead of 101, and giving some amazing advice from one of the Gauntlet's most beloved GMs.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Excellent. All right. Well, have a wonderful evening, everybody, and thank you for listening.